Thank you.
All right, good evening. We're going to start the Infrastructure Committee public hearings. First will be a public hearing on the petition of street acceptance of Pine and Central Streets. Will the clerk please call the roll? And the meeting has started at 7 p.m. Thank you.
Alderman Tom Lopez.
Here.
Alderman Jan Schmidt, I am here. Alderman Ernest Getty. Here. And Alderman Ken Gidge. Here.
Okay, and will the clerk also note that we are also joined by Alderman Clee, please?
And of course, Alderman Michael O'Brien.
Yes, as chair. Thank you. All right, we will now open the petition for street acceptance of Pine and Central Street. I'll invite anybody that has any testimony in favor to please come up to the microphone. Anybody that has any testimony in favor? Can you, for the record, state your name and Mr. Vale, thank you.
This is James Veo, the downtown specialist for the Economic Development Division. I'm here as a resource for any questions you guys may have about this and also to support this effort. Economic Development put forth an RFP, a request for proposal, some months ago, which was responded to by NeighborWorks Southern New Hampshire for 40 Pine Street. And as we started going through the process of exploring and vetting the site, it became apparent that some of the city's infrastructure was on the fee simple parcel, the parcel that was to be sold to NeighborWorks. And so this acceptance of right-of-way is really to clean up the edge of the property so that city infrastructure remains in the right-of-way and not on this fee simple parcel. If there's more questions about the RFP and the development of 40 Pine Street, happy to get into that. We haven't signed any kind of purchase and sales agreement yet because we needed to do this cleanup process first. So at some point in the future, the P&S would come before the Board of Aldermen for consideration.
All right. Mr. Veo, this is also going to be discussed at the regular Infrastructure Committee, so if you could still be in attendance, and we'll invite you up, and maybe you can provide those answers if there's several of the board has questions, okay?
Glad to do so.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there any other additional testimony in favor? Seeing none, I now direct, is there any testimony in opposition? Seeing none. Additional testimony in favor? Seeing none. Any additional or any testimony in opposition? And one more time, any testimony in favor? Seeing none. Any testimony in opposition? Seeing none. Therefore, the public hearing will be declared closed at 7:04 regarding the petition for street discontinuance. Excuse me. I should read, and that was my fault. We'll close that part of the petition of street acceptance on Pine and Central Street. Additional on this committee will be petition of street discontinuance of portions of Conard Road. Okay. Is there any testimony in favor? Please come forward. For the record, can you state your name and your address and everything in the microphone prior to speaking? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ed Gilbertson, and I live at 121 Conant Road. And I'm here to speak on behalf of the petition for discontinuance for Conant Road. A little background, back in 2003, they moved Conant Road back around 50 feet at the peak area when they were doing Maplewood development to smooth out the traffic flow to make it safer. So as a result, there's some city land that is in between the current property, deeded properties, and where Conant Road exists now. So that now the question is, the city has an unnecessary easement that is there, and so that's so what we are doing is we are asking for a partial discontinuance of the unnecessary right-of-way that encompasses 119 Conant Road and 121 Conant Road only, out of the 4 properties where the Conant Road was moved back. So all 4 properties were surveyed in the plan that you have in front of you, but only those two are the petitioners, 119 and 121 Conant, both of whom are represented here tonight. So that's why the petition states that it's for a partial discontinuance. And Attorney Celia Leonard said that's perfectly acceptable to do a partial discontinuance. You don't have to do the entire area. So the other point on that is if you look at the plan in front of you, if you look at 119 and 121 Conant Road, one of the concerns of the city engineer is that he has a clean right-of-way after the discontinuance, after they release the liability and the maintenance responsibilities for those areas. So if you look at it, it's a very clean right-of-way. Both of those properties, 119 and 121, but Conant Road, Katy Lane. So it cleanly severs the city's responsibility right at the end of 121 Conant Road. So, and that was one of the things that the city engineer was looking for. The other thing is, if you look at just those two areas, the additional city land from just I think it's labeled as A and B on there, is this current city land that's in front of 119 Conant Road and in front of 121 Conant Road. That constitutes more than half of all of the city land in that strip, and it's actually over 60%. So we'd be doing more than a majority of the land would be moved over. So that would be a good release of liability and maintenance responsibility for the city. And the petitioners fully recognize that the city of Nashua has to have access to the property to maintain utilities, such as sewers, drains, and sidewalks. And the petitioners honor these easements and appreciate the maintenance services provided because we're the ones who benefit from it, of course. So any hour of day or night, and we'll sign whatever, easements need to be signed as to allow the utilities on. In addition, the petitioners fully recognize the rights of Pennachuck Water, Liberty Utilities Gas, and Eversource Electric to access the property also at any time to do any maintenance or services which they have to do, and that's also appreciated by the petitioners because it serves us. It's been a fairly long road to get here, and we've done a lot of coordination. This isn't just a bolt out of the blue or something, a wild idea. We've been coordinating with the city all the way through. In fact, we were instructed at the beginning to work through our aldermen, so we contacted Alderman Jetty back on 13th of January. And after that, by the 15th of February, Alderman Jetty had done some research, and he found out that the way to proceed with the discontinuance, he had checked with the city surveyor, Mark Jennings, the city engineer, Steve Dukran, corporate counsel, Steve Bolton, the deputy corporate counsel, Celia Leonard, and the appropriate sections of the Nashua revised ordinances were forwarded to us so we could follow those sections and how to proceed with the petition for discontinuance. So, and we also received guidance from the city engineer to ask all four butters to the property to see if they would come on board with us. So we did that, and then immediately, Mr. Michael Fournier joined the petition, agreed to join the petition after our first contact. There was no question about it. And so the city engineer's comments actually paid fruit. We did get the full easement. We did get the full release of the liability for that area, for that nice clean right-of-way break. So on the 28th of March, our surveyor, Mr. Greg Jeffrey, he completed the survey, and did coordination after that also. He coordinated with the city surveyor, Mr. Mark Jennings, in the engineering department, Attorney Celia Leonard in the Nashua Legal Office, and the Housing Office for guidance on what are the requirements for the petition and what do they have to do. So, and it was at this time that our surveyor identified that the city of Nashua had determined that the boundary line between 121 Conant Road and 123 Conant Road was defined to be a straight line from the corner property marker of the deeded properties to intersect with Conant Road at a right angle. And that wasn't just, it was, he found that from the city surveyor and the city engineer's office, that is the proper way to do it, and it's more than that. We found out that it's state statute, so there's no variation in where that boundary is made. This had been defined, and that boundary had actually been defined when they moved the road back. That was back in 2003 when they moved the road back. And you can even see the neighbor on 123 Conant Road's driveway was installed and installed by the city funds exactly in line with that boundary. So that's confirmation that that is the true and correct boundary. Then in 16 April, Mr. Jeffrey sent the first proposed plan to the city engineer's office for preliminary review. After this initial contact, the city surveyor, Mr. Mark Jennings, worked with him, and he reviewed and commented on this plan at least 4 separate times. In fact, there's a 5th that we have now that has all the utilities on it, which is already forwarded to Mr. Mark Jennings. And in compliance with the request of the city engineer's office, all 4 landowners who could potentially benefit from the proposed reversion plan have been personally contacted by my wife Melissa and me multiple times to invite their participation in the discontinuance. So we have a substantial commitment in this. Mr. Fournier, the owner of 119 Conant Road, and Melissa and I, the owners of 121 Conant Road, have been 100% committed to following through with the discontinuance petition. And we both invested substantial amounts financially for the surveying, and then the follow-on we will have to invest for the markers, which are granite markers. And including we also paid for the survey of areas C and D, which is in front of 123 Conant Road and 68 McKenna, because in trying to comply as best we could with the direction of the city engineer, we wanted to see if those people wanted to come on board. So we had to get the survey of that area, the square footage, so that the assessor's office could go and do could give them an assessment of how much the taxes would be, because they couldn't make an informed decision without knowing what the taxes were. In the end, this is still a partial discontinuance for just 119 Conant Road and 121 Conant Road, but that's more than half of the area. And as far as maintenance of the property, all of the owners have maintained the city land in front of their deeded lots as though it was their own. We have all performed the following services. We've fertilized the city land. We've mowed the grass on the city land. We have all performed snow removal on the city land, and we have all watered on the city land. In fact, the areas we're talking about in the partial discontinuance are 119 and 121. We have sprinkler systems installed that cover most of those areas. And in fact, for ours, on 121 Conant Road, ours was installed before the final inspection came through on the road being moved back in 2003. We were renting at the time, and so we had to, our landlord installed it for us to save us from having to water that manually. And that was signed off by the city inspector. So that's signed off officially as part of the project, of the city project to move back Conant Road as final sign-off. So that's part of that. And the city of Nashua has not needed to perform any maintenance actions on these areas. They haven't had to do any snow removal, and as long as I've been in, since the roads moved back in 2003. And so we've performed all of that, and I think that's most of what I wanted to say. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
It's not really a question, but just to inform you that many things go to multiple layers in our city. So you are aware that this was also got to be heard by the planning board.
Yes,
and
we
that
went to the
has been
planning board.
tabled. So we've received no recommendation from the planning board on this officially.
All right. Okay.
Just to inform you.
Okay.
So there may not be a definitive action tonight based upon, we may wait to receive the information from an additional board.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Understood. Thank you very much for your consideration.
All right, any other testimony in favor?
My name is Michael Fournier, and as Ed stated, I'm the property owner at 119 Conant Road. And again, as he stated, I've been caring for the property the entire time I've been living there since 2003. The city land is indistinguishable from my property in the front yard because of the effort that I put into it, the sprinkler systems, fertilization. I've spent my own money to have the land accurately surveyed and will pay to have the land properly marked. I'm in favor of receiving the additional land, which will add to my property value and increase the city's revenue in the additional property tax. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional testimony in favor? Seeing none, we'll move to testimony in opposition. Please step forward, state your name, address in the microphone, please.
Hello, good evening. Oops.
You didn't break nothing. There you go.
Hello, good evening.
If
My
it's,
name-
excuse me, if it's too high, there's an adjustment mid-shaft if you want to lower the,
Oh, we're good. I think we're good. Hello, good
Hello.
evening. A second. My name is Patty Tupin. I live at 123 Conant Road, and I've been there for 27 years. I do have some photos that I'd like to present before I speak, if I may.
yes, you may submit it to the, come forward and submit it to the clerk, please. Thank you. The chair rules that we'll accept this, and when we get to the full Board of Infrastructure meeting, I'll have it listed within accepting of correspondence from you.
I appreciate that, thank you. I live at Conant Road and been there for 27 years. We love Nashua, me and my husband, and we love our home. We are here today to share the reasons why we have not joined the petition for discontinuance, as well as why we oppose it, and addressing some of the comments mentioned in the petition. We frankly never felt the need to officially own it. This portion of Conant Road moved in 2013 and has been like this for over 15 years now. We knew because of all the different utilities that exist on the properties, we would always have a relationship with the city and didn't feel incurring a significant cost of surveying the land to make it official would change anything. We now know differently. Also, I have no problem spending money, as my husband will attest to, so the idea that spending an additional $81 annually on taxes is why we're opposing this is inaccurate. That stated, the primary reason why we strongly oppose the discontinuance is where the proposed property line separating our property and 121 Conant Road has been drawn. The plans drawn by the petitioner's surveyor were done so without any direct input from us. The plans don't even show the outline of our driveway. It is important to note we are the only ones that would be negatively impacted by the proposed configuration. 119 Conant Road and 68 McKenna Drive's footprint as they use it would remain the same and not changed. Based on the proposed plan, 121 Conant Road's footprint as they use it would expand, and the footprint that we have cared for as if it was our own would shrink. The city property disputed in the land to the right of ours, property disputed is the land to the right of ours next to our driveway, approximately 24 feet by 65 feet. Both 123 and 121 Conant Road observe the telephone pole and sign as boundaries. We've been maintaining the city's land as outlined in the pictures for over 15 uninterrupted years by mowing, seeding, fertilizing, watering, plowing, and the last 3 years maintaining a garden on it. There has never been a time that we didn't treat this land as our own. During the same period, approximately 15 years, our neighbors observed the same property separation, stopping the care of the land, referencing both the telephone pole and sign as boundaries. There was an overlap very early on. However, though I don't recall the exact conversation, I do unequivocally remember the outcome where we agreed to the telephone pole and sign as boundaries. The idea that we just picked it up is untrue and absurd, as the enclosed pictures illustrate. We would like to add that since we moved here 27 years ago, prior to the developments, we have been maintaining that area around the telephone pole, which then was the road, by pruning the bushes and plowing the street to allow safe delivery of the mail. We would also like to emphasize the proximity of the proposed property line is approximately 5 feet away from our driveway. We feel very strongly that the proposed property line, moving it only arm's length from our driveway, and the primary use to our home does not keep us whole. The personal living space that we've always had would be diminished, and I know that's not the city's intent. We believe the pictures shown that I've given you show how the city land and our land, 123 Conant Road, fits with one another given the configuration and maintenance use history. We also believe that the pictures show the agreed boundary lines. The trees 121 Conant Road planted and grass maintenance all stop at the telephone pole. I would even submit the sprinkler system that was put in by the landlords prior to the Gilbertsons purchasing the home recognized the telephone pole as well, or the sprinkler placement would be much different. This is an amazing thing that happened to all of us, the gaining of land. How often does that happen? There is no reason why anyone should be left negatively impacted, and we believe that having the boundary moved so close to our living space would do so unnecessarily. Even without the piece of land in question, 121 Conant Road are the recipients of the lion's share of the city's land. All we are respectfully asking is that the proposed property line be adjusted to include this land as part of 123 Conant Road. This adjusted configuration, though not, which was referenced, this adjusted configuration, though not a standard convention, would not be unique to Nashua, and it would reflect our stewardship of the city's land for over 15 years, and to some extent for as long as we've been there, 27 years. We appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
You did hear my earlier statement that we have received. It was tabled at the planning board, and we have not received any information from that
Oh,
board.
that's okay.
correct?
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
just wanted to share our position.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any additional testimony in opposition?
Good
You
evening.
can
My
raise
name
it
is-
up if you wish. There you go.
Good evening. My name is Pete Calmy. I'm the Deputy City Engineer here to speak on behalf of DPW. We're simply asking for tabling of this matter. As you know, Mr. Chairman, we have not heard back from Pennachuck Waterworks or Eversource Electric. They are aware of the petition. We've asked them if they have any objections. And I think that was relayed to them several weeks ago. We have not heard back, so we're simply asking for the subject to be tabled for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional testimony in opposition? Seeing none. Any additional testimony in favor? Chair will recognize you again, sir. Can you speak your name into, thank you.
My name is Ed Gilbertson, and I live at 121 Conant Road. And what I'd like to just mention is that the gardens in the area that 123 Conant Road is spoken of is on city land. It's not on private land. So they have built gardens and planted bushes and stuff in it, and none of it is in front of their property or in front of their land. It's all in front of our land, in front of our deeded land. And I just want to say that we had checked this out beforehand with through our alderman, and we had checked through the city attorney, and the city attorney, Celia Leonard, Attorney Leonard had told him that if Mr. Tupin thinks he can acquire the land by adverse possession, he's mistaken, because state law does not permit the adverse possession of city-owned land. And adverse possession is squatting in legal terminology. The other issue with that is that, as we said before, this is done by state statute. The boundary between the two is a state statute, according to the city engineer. The city surveyor had conveyed that to our surveyor. Let's see. The other thing is Mr. Tupin has established a pattern of incrementally trying to take the land, the city land. He started out first trying to take our land by trimming a bush that was on our property, a forsythia bush. After that we ripped that out. he said that he didn't get anything for having maintained that bush for all these years. Then he started on incrementally squatting on the city land by planting blueberry bushes. Did that 1 year. Then 2 years later, he put in his first raised bed garden. Then the next year, he put in 2 more raised bed gardens, none in front of his own property, nor on the land that the,
Well, I would have to stop you, sir. What we're looking for is testimony allow you. You're given additional information. This is something I think that it is now something that needs to be deliberated in a different format than what we're at this committee. Although we're appreciative of it, I don't want you to feel that we're shutting you down. We do find it enlightening, but I think you're going into the wrong format with that information right now.
okay. The 2 main points were that it's a state statute that sets the boundary, and that then that you cannot take city land by adverse possession, according to New Hampshire state law.
Right. Very good. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Okay, any additional testimony in favor? Seeing none, moving on to additional testimony in opposition? Seeing none, we are going to close the hearing on the petitions for street discontinuance of the portion of Corner Road, and also included was the petition of street acceptance of Pine and Central Streets at 727. The chair would like to say, everybody please stay seated as soon as the clerk is caught up, and she's brilliant and fast. She's one of the best, and we're going to jump right into the regular infrastructure committee.
Jump right in.
You're the best, thank you. Could the clerk also, there is a sheet in the back, would you mind grabbing with the people who want to speak at the meeting?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Should be, is there a clipboard there, Alderman Schmidt? Okay, there's the one right there, thank you. Thank you, Alderman Schmidt.
Extra exercise.
Okay.
Very good, thank you. Okay. Are we, the
We're
clerk
ready to-
settled and ready to go?
Ready to go.
Outstanding. I would like now call into order the meeting of the Committee of Infrastructure on July 25th, 2018 at 7:29 PM. Will the clerk please call the roll?
I will. Alderman Tom Lopez. Alderman Jan Schmidt is here. Alderman Ernest Jettie. Here. Alderman Ken Gitch. Here. Alderman O'Brien.
Present. Also, can the record reflect that also in attendance is Alderman Clee?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving now, we're going to step right into the public comment. When your name is called, please step up to the microphone, state your name and address, and speak your piece. The chair will now call Mr. Philbrook.
Yes, Hank Philbrook, 57 Palm Street. I'm here in regards to the, trying to get a parking spot eliminated in order to, so we can empty our dumpster when needed. I have some pictures and literature if you want it. It shows how the cars are parked in that one spot only that doesn't allow the truck to get in to empty the dumpster.
Okay, can you pass it up to the clerk, and the clerk will accept it? Thank you,
Normally, it's
Mr.
not an
Philbrook, you
issue.
may continue, yes?
Normally, it's not an issue, except when we have to empty a dumpster.
Thank you.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and that's very good. As we change, I know everybody's different heights, we're not all one size, unfortunately. So feel free, there's a little, if Mr. Philbrook, if you could stand back, it's just an adjustment, twist and turn. It'll go up and down and it'll adjust to you and it'll be comfortable. If you do feel better, you can take the mics off the stand and hold it and to speak. But I do caution not to put it exactly into your mouth because you could come out muffled, so it, if it gets too close, so you have to be careful. All right, Mr. Philbrook, thank you, continue.
All right, the only problem is when we have to empty the dumpster between 2 and 3 times, every 2 and 3 weeks, we usually put a cone out in that one spot, but it's got so people to move in this cone and just park in there anyhow. So what we'd like to accomplish is try to get that a non-parking spot, if at all possible. And that's why I'm here. That's what we need. Or some other solution. I don't know what that would be. But
Very good.
that's it.
All right, thank you,
Okay,
Mr.
thanks.
Philbrook. The chair now would like to call forward Ms. Tupin. Ms. Patty Tupin? You're all set? Very good, thank you. The chair would now like to call Mr. Dan Tupin. You wave, thank you very much. The chair now recognizes Ms. Pappas.
I guess it's not going to work. I don't know if it works or not, but. He said speak up, so I'm not sure if I'm,
Yeah, no, it is working.
okay, so I'm not sure if I should. All right, sorry. Thanks. I'd like to thank Mr. Jim. Is this working? It doesn't?
Yes,
okay,
you are
sorry.
coming over. Thank you, Ms. Beth.
I'd like to thank Mr. Cutter for letting me go in front of him because I have my daughter home on her own today. There are 2 items I'm here to speak to you folks regarding. The first is one that's been hanging in this committee for a while regarding the blowing of soft yard waste. And I would have come down here quite a few meetings ago. Alderwoman Melissa Golia put some information before our before the Board of Public Works. I would say
Well,
probably.
excuse me, Ms. Pappas, I don't want to, but that matter was already previously discussed at a hearing and is not on the docket for tonight's board meeting.
Oh, I thought normally,
Oh.
even if things weren't on
No,
the.
usually at this part, anything that has, that's coming up that's being brought before tonight's hearing.
Okay, because I thought that there was something that was, I was asked for a couple of items, but. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Mr. Cutter.
Jim Cutter, 86 Pond Street, here in the city. Dear Alderman O'Brien, a number of years ago, I went to the police station and asked what could be done about the Gilbertsons, who had installed a fence in our driveway, and was told to go to City Hall for an order, and an officer would go see them. See RSA 31:102, obstructing access to highways. Now we have a tree problem whose roots are growing toward our foundation. Blocked by the fence we want removed, that needs to be taken care of as soon as possible. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. The Karen Gilbertson building permits were approved for 53.57 feet, while the actual dimension was 51 feet, with a difference of 2.57 feet. It has narrowed our driveway from 10 feet 3 inches wide to average about 7.5 feet wide, because they thought there was a gap in the 86 Pond Street deed. Jim Gibbleson was mistaken to think there was a gap. There had been one at the north end of 86 Palm. Indeed, at the time, the DeRosa family brought it on February 18th, 1942. The gap was gone February 18th, 1962, because the closed-in porch had one entrance that exited on the north side each day for 20 years. And that's CRSA 508, colon 2, number 1, and that's obstructing access to highways. And that was about 6 years before the Gilbersons' ride on January 12th, 1968. Our driveway and clothesline used for domestic purposes are curtilage and belong to our house. Since the Gilbertsons have their property for sale, it is not necessary to go to court because full disclosure is required. CRSA 627, colon 9, number 1, and that's curtilage. Please inform James L. and Annette R. Gilson, who have moved to 145 Page Road, Litchfield, and Realtor Bobby Sinyard, Bead Group, 108 Bonema Road, Amherst, to remove the fence and metal shed from our driveway. Sincerely, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cutter. Chair now recognizes Mr. Gilbertson.
Hi, I'm Ed Gilbertson of 121 Conant Road. In one of the most bizarre coincidences of my life, I'd just like to clear up that I'm in no way related to the Gilbertson that he's talking about, and we have no family in the state other than us. Thank you very much.
Fair enough, thank you. Chair recognizes Alderman Lopez.
With respect to Mr. Cutter, it's not as big a coincidence as you would think, because it was only a matter of time before a Gilbertson showed up of some type.
Thank you, Alderman Lopez. Chair recognizes Mr. Fournier. Thank you. Mr. Fournier waves. Seeing that's all on my list, is there anybody that has any other comments of items that are going to be discussed before the board this evening? Seeing none, going to close the public comment. Communications, and we've had several come in late, so there being no objections, I would like to suspend the rules and accept and place on file communications received after regarding to include the overnight parking ban, the letter from Mr. Cutter, the testimony presented by the Tupins, and the testimony provided by Mr. Gilbertson, and also testimony that has been presented by Mr. Cummings. Did I leave anything out?
No, looks like
Okay,
you got it.
seeing that, may I repeat again? I was looking for a vote. I'm going to suspend the rules and accept and place on file the aforementioned communications. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Communications are accepted. Thank you. Okay, next.
I move to recommend final passage for the petition for street exception, Pine and Central Streets.
Okay, there's a motion before us, a final acceptance for final passage of Pine and Central Streets. Any questions on the discussions? Alderman Jettie.
I just have a question of Mr. Cummings or Mr. Veo. This intersection is an intersection that I use every day, and I've noticed that
Well, Alderman Jettie, could you please hold for a second? Mr. Veo, could you please step forward? And Mr. Cummings, if you want to join, please, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Alderman Jettie. It's best to let them come up, and then we can have the...
So I use that intersection every day, and I've noticed that if I think most of you are probably familiar with it, and, there is a plan that was submitted to us. But when you're going west on Central Street and approaching the intersection of Pine Street, there are two right turn lanes going onto Pine Street, and Pine Street goes from 2 lanes to 1 lane as it proceeds north towards Broad Street. And there's 1 lane going west that intersects with Pine Street, and if you go straight across, you join Ledge Street, and if you make a left turn, you go onto Pine Street heading south. So I've noticed that the 2 lanes that turn right there, going north onto Broad Street, the Broad Street Parkway, are both lanes are hardly ever used. It's usually just the 1 lane, the rightmost lane, and the lane that goes straight across Pine Street onto Ledge Street. You've got traffic that's going straight, and you've got traffic that's trying to make a left turn onto Pine Street. And oftentimes, the left-turning Pine Street traffic comes to a stop to allow the traffic from Ledge Street proceeding east onto Central Street to proceed. And there are times when there's enough traffic where the left-turning lane, 1 car ends up turning left and everyone else has to sit there and wait. So I'm wondering if you've given any thought to reconfiguring that intersection to allow for 2 lanes going west so that there'd be a left turn lane onto Pine Street and a straight lane onto Ledge Street, and just 1 lane turning right onto Pine Street going to the Broad Street Parkway. I don't know. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do, thank you. For the record, Tim Cummings, I'm the Director of Economic Development for the city, and with me is my colleague James Veo, who's the downtown specialist. I'm very familiar with the intersection that was just referenced. I would be remiss not to point out that we have a member of our engineering department, Peter, here with us. This would be something that would fall under their purview. I don't know if he feels comfortable this evening making comments on it, but I wanted to make sure that the board is in recognition of that. And with those comments being said,
Well, excuse me, Mr. Cummings, would you feel comfortable if the city engineer would like to come forward? The chair will invite you. No, you may have a seat, sir. It'll be a lot more comfortable with the microphone. Yes, sir.
They don't bite.
yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. Sorry for the interruption. You may continue.
Thank you. So I will defer from an engineering perspective to Peter, and I hope he weighs in. I want to say that we have looked at this, though not from an engineering perspective. I want to echo Alderman Jetty's comments. I think it's something that does need to be looked at. I don't know if Pine Street, if you were to make that left, is wide enough to accommodate 2 turn lanes. I think that's something that would need to be evaluated. I think Pine Street narrows down. I do also know and recognize, just from a planning perspective, that we design our roadways often with a 20-year type horizon. We're not thinking about today. We're thinking about 20 years from now and the way that the roadway needs to be designed to accommodate future growth of traffic flow. But again, putting those comments aside, I do think it's something that we should look at, and we should also look at it in tandem with the conversation that this committee started in a previous session relative to reversing the traffic flow in that area of Central Street. And it's something that we are very aware of, that the neighborhood is interested in and that the community is interested in. We recognize that when you come off the Broad Street Parkway, you essentially land in a residential neighborhood, and it's not very clear how you get to Main Street, and getting to Main Street from the Broad Street Parkway is somewhat difficult. So I would recommend that as you're looking at that intersection, you look at the reversal of the flow of traffic to Main Street to make it a better impact for the entire community and neighborhood.
Could I follow?
Alderman Jettie.
I bring this up only because we're talking about the right-of-way on that lot that's right at that intersection, and whether or not we ought to be preserving, whether we're going to need any land, if we do make a change, whether we need any land, any additional land from that lot that we're talking about tonight.
If I
Mr.
may,
Vale.
thank you. To the chair and
Mr.
Alderman
Vale,
Jettie.
just read yourself and identify. Thank you.
One of the things I would point out, and that this may or may not affect your decision-making, but just a point of reference, I believe everyone in their packet received a survey. There's a couple of circles drawn, and those have various meaning. The ones that are empty circles are actually, they're part of the infrastructure that exists for the signalization of that intersection. And so those circles right now are kind of, one is straddling the property line as it exists, and another one is wholly within the fee simple parcel or the parcel that we're looking to sell. And so that has triggered this look at accepting this as part of the street right of way. One of the things I would note is that if you were to make significant changes to this intersection and you needed more land than what was shown here, you would probably need to tear down the existing signalized intersection and relocate them, which would probably be significant in cost. And so my intuition, and I'm not the expert in this, but my intuition is that you probably could find better solutions using real estate on the other side of the road or reconfiguring the lanes to achieve what you're suggesting without the need for taking any additional real estate in this location.
Okay, thank you. Is there any additional questions by members of the committee? Alderman Lopez.
Was this, I thought the intersection might have been designed as part of the Broad Street Parkway and it was originally done not by the city? Is that inaccurate? I thought the design of the parkway was part of, wrapped up in getting, maybe you might know, in getting the funding for it? So did we design that or did someone else?
Alderman, I believe engineering.
Excuse me, could you just state your name again for the record, please?
Pete Kohalmi, Deputy City Engineer for the city. I believe that if the city did not design it directly, we had a consultant do it. And these are the type of matters that the engineering department does normally get involved with. Unfortunately, I've been with the city since March, only a few months.
Hey,
and
welcome aboard.
Thank you. And this is the first I've heard of this matter, Alderman Jettie. So I'm just not familiar with the matter at all, unfortunately. But I'd be happy to talk to the city engineer, Steve Dukran, and Wayne Husband, our traffic engineer, to look into the matter.
Okay, very good. Any additional questions by members of the board? Seeing none, there is a motion by Alderman Schmidt to recommend final passage. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Lovely clerk, what's next on the agenda, please?
Well, I'd like to move to table our petition for discontinuance due to the fact that it is tabled at the planning board at present.
Okay, very good. As everybody remembers, a motion to table is non-debatable, but there is the petition for discontinuance, a portion of Corner Road, which was also assigned to the planning board and was tabled at their meeting on 7/12/18. The motion before us is to table. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Seeing none, the motion to table is complete. Next on the agenda,
Unfinished business, we have none.
there is none. New business.
Also none.
Okay. There is a motion, 01816, it was tabled in committee. Alderman Lopez, do you have a motion to
I'd like to
remove 01816 from the table?
I'd like to move to remove it from the table, please.
Okay, there's a motion by Alderman Lopez to remove from the table 01816. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion to remove from the table. Will the clerk please read 01816, please?
Establishing a no parking zone on the west side of Pine Street. It was tabled in 6/27/2018.
Okay, is there, would you like to make the motion? All right, Alderman Lopez, please make the motion. Thank you.
Recommend final passage.
Thank you. There's a motion by Alderman Lopez to recommend final passage of 01816. Any discussion on the motion? Alderman Jettie.
I think when we tabled it, you said that we ought to have Director Cummings here come and speak on this. Is that?
Hello.
Well, yes,
why?
and there was
And I
also,
see him
too,
sitting
unfortunately,
here.
Alderman Lopez, which was the key sponsor, wasn't here to move it, and everything was an additional reason. But do you have a question to Mr. Cummings, Alderman Jettie?
Whether he has any comments about this.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
The Chair recognizes Mr. Cummings.
Thank you. For the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Economic Development for the city, and my office has no opposition to this petition before you. We understand the need for it. We reviewed it, and we think it's a good way to proceed and move forward with.
Yeah. And Alderman Lopez.
Just to add context, I did initially, before making the motion, discuss it with city engineering and legal. They did the fiscal note, they did the study, and they were the ones who recommended the specific location. Given the communication that we received, the experience that 57 Palm Street has had is very similar to mine when I attempted to contact the neighbors. Knock on the doors, nobody answers. You can see from the picture that there is some parking on the other side of it. It's basically an area surrounded by parking lots, except for this one spot. And the main issue is really that that space is in the way of a large vehicle that needs to collect trash. So it's one person who leaves their car there for long stretches of time. We haven't been able to get a hold of them. I hadn't noticed, but from the pictures, it actually shows a Missouri plate. And it seems like the business has done what it can to try to be a cooperative neighbor and ask them to politely move their car when needed. That doesn't seem to be happening, so I think the recommendation makes sense, and I support it.
Very good. Any other discussion of the motion before us, a final passage? Seeing none. There's a motion by Alderman Lopez to recommend final passage of 01816. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, 01816 passes. Okay, that seems to conduct all ours business before us. There is now general discussion. And Alderman Jettie.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I've received several communications from people talking about the overnight parking situation. And I think you all have received copies of that. So I thought that, as I looked at the overnight parking ordinance, I saw that the parking ordinances are very complicated. There's a lot of them. They deal with a lot of different things. But what I understood, the part that dealt with, I think in our ordinances, it's referred to as night parking. I found an ordinance that said that parking is for more than 2 hours is prohibited between 12 midnight and 6 a.m., except on streets where parking is permitted by special permit. And when I looked at the city website, the parking enforcement section, the city website talks about, parking being prohibited overnight. The ordinance specifically prohibits parking for more than 2 hours during midnight and 6 a.m. And, some people have, there is a provision, paragraph C of that ordinance that says that if people are anticipating overnight guests or whatever, they can call the police department and request permission to park overnight during those occasions. When the people have told me that when parking changed from being under the jurisdiction of the police department to the economic development department, that the ordinance refers people to the police department, not the parking, the economic development department. And the economic development department, I think, as opposed to the police department, has regular office hours. Police department's open 24 hours a day, so people would find, if this came upon them suddenly, they couldn't call the police department like they used to. So someone else talked to me about people who work downtown, for example, waiters and waitresses. The restaurants close after 2 o'clock, and so they've been getting tickets for parking for more than 2 hours after midnight. So I wondered if it would not be a good idea for us to re-examine the parking ordinance as it pertains to night parking or overnight parking, and whether we shouldn't have Director Cummings, and I see he's here tonight, come and talk to us about this issue. Maybe the police department should be consulted, the Board of Public Works. And speaking of the Board of Public Works, Ms. Pappas, who is a commissioner on the Board of Public Works, actually, I thought she was here tonight to speak on this issue. And I don't know if it was a misunderstanding on your part, Mr. Chairman, that, telling her that she couldn't speak.
No, she started discussing about the leaf blowing, which is
Right.
not on our agenda.
Right. But, and I think she misunderstood you.
She may have, I don't know what.
She also was here to talk about that, and
She could have been, and also too, so for your additional information, there is a portion on the, as the meeting goes, that there is open public comment, and that's where items that aren't on the agenda. So it's most unfortunate she left. She would have been more than welcome to stay, and if she wanted to discuss the leaf blowing at that time, that would have been the appropriate time, just to clarify that.
so I'm sure she'll be watching this at some point, and I want to extend the committee's apology to her about that misunderstanding.
Well, you may apologize, but, Mr. Alderman Jettie, I'm the chair, and I'm trying to hold a decorum of the committee. And the thing is, is our accepted rules. It is misfortune, I will say that she did not completely understand our procedures, yes.
So I understand, Mr. Chairman, and I respect what you're saying. I would like to point out that our agenda doesn't say that the public comment at the beginning is only for items on the agenda.
Alderman Jettie, this is perhaps a discussion, I'm going to rule you out of order in your comments. This is perhaps a discussion on another different matter. I thought the issue that is before us, we have Director Cummings before us, and I would like to spin it back that we need to get back to the overnight parking. If we could have our comments based on that subject matter, I think that's exactly our purpose of this board. Thank you.
So I just brought up Ms. Pappas, because she was here to speak on that as well, about, she, being on the Board of Public Works, told me that, that from the Public Works point of view, at least from her point of view as a commissioner of the Board of Public Works, that the Board of Public Works really doesn't have a problem with overnight parking. I don't know if that would be their official position, but I think they should certainly be invited to talk to us about that. So I'm thinking that, that it would be appropriate for us to look at the whole issue. I looked at Manchester's ordinance, and they permit overnight parking year-round during the winter time. I think it's November to May, I'm not, maybe it's April. They do limit it to one side of the street, except for snow emergencies, where parking is banned, just like we do. We ban parking during snow emergencies. So I would just like to begin the discussion, and you know, maybe as the committee has time, we could invite these various people to talk to us about this issue. And I see Mr. Cummings is here, and I see he submitted a memo. I haven't had a chance to read it, but maybe he could tell us what's in it.
Okay, thank you, Alderman Jettie. Mr. Cummings, did you have your hand up?
I did, yes. I just want to make sure it's clear, and it sounds like the clarification did come from Alderman Jettie, which is I think DPW has some pretty strong opinions about on-street parking, and I would suggest that if this committee was to take any actions, you include them in on that conversation, along with our fire department and police department. This is a very sensitive topic. For the community. One I'm very well aware of. I've had many members of actually the entire Board of Aldermen and members of this committee approach me and discuss this subject matter with me. I've had some members of the body not discuss this with me. I've had members of our other planning boards, committees, and other just stakeholders engaged in local government discuss this matter, and there is not a consensus on how to handle this issue. I've heard many different strategies and recommendations, and ultimately the law is very clear in how we regulate this subject matter here in the city. And if this body wants to change that, I'm here to help you through that process, to facilitate the conversation, help bring about the consensus necessary, and try to make sure you impose best practices where possible. With that being said, Mr. Chair, I put together this memo to help organize us. If I may, I'm going to read it for the record. Again, my name is Tim Cummings. I'm the Director of Economic Development. We also have the parking manager for the city, Jill Stansfield, with us this evening, and if I could we bring her up?
Yeah, absolutely. Ms. Stanfield, welcome.
Again, so we are writing this memo in response to many comments, sentiments, and opinions being rendered relative to overnight parking. And it is our sincere hope a consensus can be achieved as to how the community would like to handle overnight parking moving forward. The specific request is we would like and greatly appreciate the opportunity to discuss this matter with the Infrastructure Committee, whether that's this evening or at a certain point in time where we can bring in many stakeholders. We defer to you. But we believe it prudent to have a public discussion on this topic. By way of background, the city of Nashua bans overnight parking, and there's a punishable by a $25 ticket. This ordinance has been in existence for decades and has been reaffirmed by this community from time to time, most recently in 2013. Until recently, there was no overnight parking program or permit system in place. That actually was just instituted a few years ago in a pilot program where permits were made available to certain members of the Nashua community. You need to reside in a designated area, which in turn allows you to park on certain pre-approved streets overnight. You can see an enclosed map. I'm going to ask Ms. Stansfield to pass this map around. There's a map attached to your packet, but it is not as good as the map that is being handed out to you. In addition to the map that's being handed out to you, I've also photocopied and attached the ordinance that we are referencing this evening for your for your reference. So we are receiving conflicting feedback from members of the Board of Aldermen, other active members of our local community, and the general public relative to enforcement strategies and what tack to take in terms of executing enforcement duties. It has been suggested on more than one occasion that the enforcement need not occur in more suburban areas of the city, and maybe just warnings be issued regularly across the city in lieu of citations. We have also heard that parking overnight should be allowed everywhere by right. Conversely, we have heard routinely that, and we've been asked for overnight parking to occur in certain areas by residents, believing violations are regularly occurring. There are pros and cons to many of the differing scenarios that this community can undertake. We would like to facilitate a conversation with you and point out those pros and cons as we move forward. Some ways that this community could move forward would be to continue with the program as is with no changes, allow for parking overnight everywhere in the city as a matter of right. Another, for instance, is potentially to develop a hybrid solution. For instance, we could allow parking overnight only during certain times, or conversely, prohibit parking during certain times of the year. We could also do this in just certain neighborhoods, or we could do it by right within the entire city. We could also look to create a temporary 1-month type parking permit in some neighborhoods to allow for the temporary parking in front of someone's home for a specified period of time in specified neighborhoods. Or we could allow residents to call in from time to time to receive special dispensation for one-off occurrences where someone needs to park on the street. We do allow this, and as the ordinance references, we have a lot of housekeeping to go through. It's codified that you should call the police department, since parking enforcement has now moved under parking operations under the Economic Development Office. We still have some housekeeping that we need to go through to clean up our ordinances to match our practices. But at the end of the day, we had to develop some policies and administrative procedures on how best to handle that. When it transferred from police, we thought it was best, as we were getting up and running, to suggest a 4 p.m. deadline. That is nothing more than a procedure we put in place. We could change that if need be and give someone later time, and give people the opportunity to more periodically be checked to call in it, and to make sure that you're in a good position, so you are not receiving a citation. I will caution you, though, that that's for special occasions and for certain special circumstances where this disposition would be granted. It is not to be used on a regular basis. That was the impetus of the ordinance when it was originally promulgated. At the end of the day, as a community, we need to decide how we want to regulate this matter. We need it to be equitable and fair to all residents, because what we don't want to do is just focus on the parking enforcement in the inner core where we have the low and moderate income individuals who would be actually cited more often because they're in a more dense area, and not take it equitably to our more suburban, less dense areas. We need to develop the pros and cons to what approach we take, and so we can get a clear understanding to emerge. And this should be the start of this should be the start of a community dialogue where we can solicit recommendations, and recommendations can be drafted. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any opportunities to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. Just an oversight with me. I'm glad that you had mentioned that several housekeeping items. Yes, there was a relatively recent transfer of the parking from the police department over to community development. And I don't know if it was properly 100% put out there to the general public, if they were aware of the change and everything. And I think it's very good that you mentioned that's part of the housekeeping effort. And I think if you did something like that, get the information out there via the paper or on the city website. Also, too, people don't really know exactly who to contact, so probably do something along those lines to improve. Also improve, my question would be to you, if the person's out there that is monitoring the overnight parking situation, before he puts a ticket on the car, Is that person capable by any electronic modern means to check if that vehicle received permission to be there, or was a request made due to a special circumstance to stay in that position for that night?
Yes, we do keep that information electronically and take it with us
Okay.
in the field overnight.
So, Ms. Stanfield, they actually do that then? That's part of the procedural now?
Yes.
Okay, very good. It's, because another overview of me is to grant it blanket, take away, allow anybody to park. Once you give it out there, it will be also very hard if we need to retract it back. So it's something that we need to go very slowly. Also, too, somebody may like it and somebody may not. And it causes neighbors dispute, particularly if you're blocking the guy's barrel, or let's just say the suicide spot that's opposite the guy's driveway, you know what I mean, which is, could inadvertently happen. So the thing is, I would like to do it very slow. I think Alderman Clee wants to say something. I'll yield to Alderman Clee at this time, and I'll follow up with additional thought. Alderman Clee.
First, just for the public's knowledge, it was referenced that there's a number to call, and Ms. Stanfield was kind enough to give me that number. And just for the public that are listening, it's 603-589-3077. And although we do have a 4 o'clock deadline, if someone called after that, it would be heard and it would be taken into the field, as you said. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. I uniquely, as many of us are, I have a ward with very wide streets and very narrow streets. So lifting the ban could become an issue, and I'm glad you brought that to the attention of that. If we lifted the ban and said anybody can park anywhere, even with the parking permits, as Ms. Stanfield can attest, we've had problems, and they've been good enough to go out and ticket on a regular basis for these people that were offending, because the neighbors that did have permit parking weren't able to park there. It's gotten better, I believe, in the certain areas. So the residents had no place to park. They don't have driveways in certain communities and so on. So we do need to think of that, think of the lesser streets. And to be honest with you, those are in the lower income areas. These offenders were people that actually didn't live in the area, if I'm not mistaken. They lived in another state. So these are some of the issues that we're doing. At the same time, just to address Commissioner Pappas, who was here, she was here to speak about that and the parking. She did not understand about the comments towards the end, but she is one of the people that were addressed in the communications and is looking to, as many are, how do I get permit parking? And I think when we do an education sheet, and I know you're working very, very hard on that, I think that would be a good idea, is how do they get permitted parking if it's not part of the list of that? How can they get theirs added to it? Do the aldermen bring that to the infrastructure committee? How do they do that? I think they need a how-to, so.
If I may, Mr. Chair. So in the previous session, working through the Infrastructure Committee, an exhaustive effort was made to study select inner core communities, inner core neighborhoods, particularly the Crown Hill, French Hill, and Tree Streets areas to permanently implement the pilot program for the overnight parking program, and that developed the more comprehensive list that you see in front of you for approved overnight parking streets and the residents of areas that can actually apply for the permit. It was through my office that we initiated this action. Mr. Veo was the project manager and shepherding this through for the downtown. And we did an exhaustive analysis consulting DPW, police, fire. Some of you may have been on the infrastructure committee at the time. We analyzed and made recommendations based off of the input of the various departments, as well as solicited community input as to what were the streets that should move forward. That's how you have the list currently. That's how the list currently before you was conceived. In terms of adding additional streets, our clerk's office is actually in charge of issuing this permit. She keeps an exhaustive list from people who suggest that they would be interested in this and taking advantage of this program, and she recommends that they contact their individual ward alderman or woman to see if a petition can be created, and then the analysis starts all over again.
Thank you very much.
Any follow-up?
Yes, and I just wanted to make one other comment about Commissioner Pappas, and I don't mean to belabor it. She had to leave because she had a child at home, and so she did not understand that her comments needed to come towards the end. So, in all fairness, and for her.
Yeah,
that-
and it is most
Yes.
regretted, but unfortunately,
Yes.
we do have rules. I was kind of
Absolutely.
assumptive, perhaps wrong on my part, but where she is sitting on a city board, I would imagine they follow general rules as similar to ours. One would understand, but
Yes.
unfortunately, it seems to have been a miscommunication, which I
agree.
regret.
I agree.
But however, our rules do say, in the beginning, public comment to discuss germane issues that are appearing before the board. Any additional comment? Alderman Kidge, did you have one?
Yes, I did ask you if I could say something before we are done.
Okay, we're not done yet. We're still on the overnight
Okay, thank
parking,
you.
but,
Yes, I did have one suggestion.
Uh-huh.
You know, people do have friends or relatives coming, you know, to the city. Now, let's face it, there are spots that no matter what you do are going to be crowded. But I can't see why we couldn't come up with something where a citizen could come in and ask for maybe a temporary pass for a period of time, or guest, either 2 or 3. They get the certificate, put it on the vehicles with a date. That means that the people coming to visit would have a place without being fined. I think there's lots of ways of looking at it, but I also do understand that a lot of people take advantage of the situation too. And I'm just trying to figure out, because this has happened on my street, which is a dead-end street. It happened to my car, which was parked on my property, but it didn't look like it. So I can see the frustration. It is not just the money, it is just that if you do have guests coming, and it does happen, that I think we can work something out.
Alderman Schmidt.
Thank you very much, and hi, it's nice to meet you after emails.
You as well.
Over in Ward 1, we have nice wide streets mostly. We do have some curvy things that are very hard if people do park on them. But people have complained about the fact that they've gotten a ticket because they didn't know that we had a ban. Since the change has been made, couldn't we get this information out to people? At least, you know, where we stand right now, and perhaps we'd like some information from them on what they would suggest. I think that that would be a really, really helpful thing. Second point, because the high school, when it was put in, had limited parking, and we all know kids love to come in their cars, they parked in the neighborhoods. And so the city banned parking around those, on those little streets during school hours. Completely, totally. And that can be a problem. If you have a driveway that can take 2 cars and your sister comes over for lunch with her friends, it's a problem. The police could ticket you. Perhaps we do need to have some kind of pass for the people who live there to park during the day. I know that a couple of people have mentioned it to me, and if that could be something that could be discussed, that would be stupendous.
Mr. Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have had conversations in that regard. The city of Somerville, Massachusetts offers a very unique visitor parking type program that we have been looking at and thinking that that might be an applicable way of possibly moving forward as one of the ways of trying to address that particular issue in terms of having that visitor, whether they're staying overnight or they're visiting you and it's prohibitive parking on street and it's something that you need because of whatever the case may be. You're not going to be able to have on-street parking all the time because of our regulations. So that is something that we can definitely look at and possibly address. I think it's a very community or neighborhood specific issue, and a lot of public outreach is going to be necessary to see whether that's something that the individual neighbors would be interested in. I would suggest if you are a ward alderman, that might be a good ward alderman topic at one of your town hall meetings. Because we would be very sensitive to move forward with any recommendations until we had that type of community input.
Thank you.
Okay. Alderman Jettie.
So I'm glad we've started this conversation. I appreciate your facilitating it, Mr. Chairman. I know that, you know, I'm old enough to know that, or to remember when, you know, there was, you know, in each household, it was lucky to have one car. And that car was parked in the driveway, and if you were lucky enough to have a garage, in the garage. Now it seems like every member of the household has a car. So we have more cars in the city and not enough places to put them, it seems. And I think, you know, I'm not sure how the general parking ban came to being. My own speculation is that the you know, because of this history of everybody having, you know, at most one car and it being secure in their garage or in their driveway, a car on the street in the middle of the night was suspicious to the police, and they felt the need to check it out. And so at some point, we said no cars on the roads so that the police wouldn't spend their time checking these out unnecessarily. But times have changed, and I think we've had kind of an unintended consequence, at least in my mind, that you know, as houses, single-family homes with one car have turned into multifamily homes with many cars, and this ban on street parking, which has been somewhat alleviated with this new ordinance. But we forced people. I drive around town and I see where we've forced homeowners to take down their trees, you know, rip up their hedges, pave over their lawns in order to provide parking off the street for the residents of that property. So it's been an unintended consequence in that I think it's made the city look worse. You know, these nice little lawns with hedges around them are disappearing. It's caused the paving over of a lot of land, you know, which has increased the imperviousness of the city. You know, rain has no place to run off. It's causing a problem with our sewer runoff. There are all kinds of problems that I think have occurred as a result of this.
It affects your value.
And I think it's a good opportunity for us to re-examine, you know, the reasons for banning parking. And I know people have said that they don't want strangers parking in front of their houses. But maybe a solution is that, you know, we have some kind of permitting system where, you know, the residents of that street are allowed to park. And of course, this changes during the wintertime and snow emergencies and all that stuff. But I'm glad we're starting the conversation, and I appreciate your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Alderman Jettie. Mr. Cummings, oh, yes, Alderman Gedge.
I think I agree with Alderman Jettie to a great degree. My neighbor, for instance, came home and sister was visiting, so in the parking place, or two places in the driveway, so she pulled up and parked in front of her house. When they left, it was like 10, 11 o'clock. Instead of going out moving the car into the driveway, gets a ticket in the morning. It's things like that that are just silly. It's no need for that. I mean, if it's in front of one's house, and one just doesn't go out and move it, I think something has to be done. Now, having said that, I think there are places that will not stop. It'll always be this way, on purpose. But I think we've got to start looking a little bit larger. It's like people getting tickets for really no reason. And I'm not sure if the people who are giving them have the discretion of not ticketing them or making some sort of a calculation. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but I agree that this something has to get done.
I think people are getting tickets for a reason. Their car is parked overnight. I don't think it's indiscriminate. I understand what you meant. I just want to clarify that point. Are you done with your comment, though?
Yes, no, well, they're you're right, they're on the road and that's against the law. Having
Right.
said that, my neighbor's parking in front of their house. I understand it's on the road, but there's got to be some sort of leeway. I mean, why does somebody always have to be off the road completely? I understand during weather, et cetera. And this can't happen everywhere. Don't misunderstand me.
Yeah.
There are just areas you just can't do this.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Cummings,
Yes, sir.
in referring to the two correspondence we received, the common denominator of both is people received tickets. And the thing is, it sounds like part of the process or problem was the problems of contact and other different things, or checking the voicemail or whatever is your process to make sure that the call was made to say that the vehicle was asking permission to be all right. You did mention that these were going to be housekeeping issues. Would it be fair then that would be good surmise from this board, that would be a fair starting point to come up with? Can you report back to us, and when do you think you could give us that report? Perhaps maybe as early as the next infrastructure meeting to give us on some of the cleanup of those house cleaning items that you have suggested. I think you got the gist of what hearing from our citizens and from members of this board exactly what should be the marching order. Do you have an additional comment, Alderman Schmidt?
I'd like to know where the parking problems are, where you ticket, where are the issues that we really have to face if we are going to make any changes.
So
The report?
if I may,
Mhm.
define issues. So when you say where are the parking
Tickets.
issues, so we can run a report and show you
That would be great.
where there are tickets coming from, and where maybe there are more heavily areas that are ticketed. That's simple data that we could absolutely produce for you.
Thank you.
Okay. So perhaps by next month's meeting, would that be too soon?
No, we
Yeah,
can
I don't-
start
I
the
don't see this as
conversation.
a really burning issue. It's been, the ban, as you say, has been in place forever.
That's right.
I've lived in the city for quite some time, and it's been a ban, so,
Mr. Chairman, if I may, it really comes down to what the community value is and what the community wants. And it may be time to address this issue, and it may be time to not take a one-size-fits-all approach. Right now, it's just very clear how the regulations read and how we are implementing them. And so it's funny, we often hear the comments, I got a ticket last night, I was parked out on the street, they never dispute that they didn't park out on the street. The dispute is that they've done it for 20 years and they haven't gotten a ticket previously, for whatever reason may be. They were very lucky individuals, you know, and parking enforcement didn't go by at that time, and it just so happened to be that they're you know, parked out there on the wrong night when parking enforcement went by, and it is what it is. And so I need direction from this body, and it's a conversation that I think is starting now, as to what direction you'd like to go in terms of how you want this community to be governed and what type of public policy you want to have. We can make some recommendations to you, and we can explore differing type of programs in other cities and bring those to you. There's going to be pros and cons to this. I think we can administratively start to adopt some of these housekeeping matters. For instance, the 4 p.m. deadline, maybe we need to look at changing that to like 10 p.m. and making sure that the overnight parking enforcement people are more regularly checking that phone line so they know, and having a conversation with people if they get a citation and they happen to have called in, and we can verify that because it's a voicemail that gets left, and we can administratively waive that ticket. Those are all administrative things we can do to help change the way we're implementing the program. But I turn to you and ask you, how do you want to regulate this city? Because you're charged with that, and right now, it's very clear.
Alderman Clee.
Thank you. I have two questions. One is about the report of ticketing. Obviously, you can't be in every single street every single night. That would be impossible. It was one thing when the police were doing it because they had different crews that were going around, and possibly were able to take more. Is it accurate to say that for the most part, it's when someone calls that you will go out there, or is it that you're just patrolling all the streets and?
We do keep a list of problem areas, and we stay on top of those. For example, Toll Street is a great example where we've actually been able to curb the bad behavior. So we do have a list. We maintain it on a daily basis. We've made good progress in some of the areas where there have been abuses and issues. So we do keep track of it, and we do stay on those areas.
But to follow up on that, we do have routes, if you will, that are developed and followed regularly, that are, for lack of a better word, regularly patrolled or scouted.
May I ask?
Follow up?
Yep.
Yes.
But you're not actually hitting every single street. So if I guess what I'm asking is, do you often get calls that say someone's parked in front of my home, or there's somebody, and then you would come out and take care of that particular situation? That was the point that I guess I was getting to.
Yes.
That you do go a lot of times based on phone calls.
Yes.
That are outside of your normal route.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. The other comment that I just wanted to make was, seeing that you're checking the voicemail or whatever, and I know we have a new phone system, so it can send like an email or text message to another phone that says there's a call there. That being said, is it possible that we could just remove the deadline? So for instance, if Uncle Jimmy's at my house and he's drinking and it's 2:00 in the morning, I don't want him leaving, but I didn't call before 10:00. I would feel more comfortable if we just kind of got rid of the deadline and people could call in at 1:00 in the morning to say, Uncle Jimmy's loaded and I don't want him to drive home, something to that nature. If we could just think about that. I'm not saying do it, I'm just asking if we could think about that.
I think that would be one of the items that we'll bring back to you in August with how we would handle that, because I hear you,
Thank
and
you.
and I do agree that there is probably a better way that we can address it.
Thank you.
If I may, I too kind of am a little, with the technology and the availability, at one time I understand you needed a cutoff point because you were going to be removed from point A out in the street doing your job, but the technology is there, that mobile office, so to speak, that he could, or she could, whoever's the person could check instantaneously. Mr. Cummings is.
So I just want to follow up, though, and be clear, what we're talking about now is, and it's, and double check what I say, but with the ordinance, but it's my understanding or the inference I'm getting is these are special one-off type of scenarios and not regularly recurring.
Yes.
So that's all well and good when you have this scenario of a family member who maybe has had a little too much to drink and it makes more sense to leave the car parked on street. Absolutely. But that doesn't address the issue of what I think is also a problem, which is a parent of a child in college and they've gone away and now they've come back for the summer and they're parking in front of the house from May to September. How do you address that? Because that scenario needs to be addressed by this body. Because right now, it's very clear that if you're parked on the street, that's prohibited. And I think the community would be well served if we develop strategies to address those type of conditions.
Alderman Schmidt?
Resident parking stickers would be a first move, I think.
Okay.
Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. We could look at doing resident parking stickers. And I assume what you mean by that is neighborhood-wide, not community-wide. So it would be, I'm not saying we would do this, but ward-specific, or something that identifies certain neighborhoods. And we look at maybe doing something along those lines. That way, it may develop or evolve. I again, am going to be looking to you and to the board to help guide this conversation. Maybe some wards or some subset of wards are going to not want on-street parking and that it would still be prohibited out there.
Alderman Clee?
Thank you. And I agree. I think it was mentioned earlier that possibly doing like a 1 month or 2 month or for the summer kind of permit. And I like that idea and I would, and not to pick on Commissioner Pappas, who actually is back now. But yes, something like to say Swartz Terrace or something of that nature, a zone or something like that. I think that would be a wonderful idea. Thank you.
Okay, any other further comments from the board? Alderman Jettie?
Just one last thing. What about the complaint I got about people working and they don't get out of work until 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning? I suppose if we started the ban later, 2 o'clock instead of midnight.
I'm going to have to look into that. I can't give you an answer right now on that. I mean, that's the first I'm actually hearing of this. A lot of what has been discussed tonight, I've heard regularly. That's actually a very new item for me, so I'm going to need to look into that.
Okay. Thank you.
You could put that on your list of
Duly noted.
your bag of tricks.
Duly noted. I have a downtown specialist who I think would be eager to tackle that.
Any other questions from members of the board? Seeing none. Mr. Cummins and Ms. Stanfield, I think we gave you enough, and I think that's very good. I appreciate you coming forward. There seems like we, again, to echo some of the statements from members on the board, I think best not to throw the baby quickly out with the bathwater. I think take incremental steps and adjust and look, and maybe we will bring the parking issue to a better solution. I think the first thing is let's do a good PR and get information out and clean up the house cleaning, and let's see where that brings us and see where that goes. So that being said, Mr. Cummings, yes.
Thank you. If I could indulge the committee, I have a couple other topics that I want to make sure I bring to this body's attention because they are infrastructure-related items. I wanted to tease them for you. One, we as a community, as a small select steering committee, have been working diligently to move forward an infrastructure improvement project that is being 100% financed by the state. It's typically referred to as the East Hollis / Bridge Street Traffic Improvement Project. It's a $3.6-ish million roadway redesign of typically what is thought of as the X right before the Hudson line. And so we've been meeting regularly, and it's been out in preliminary engineering done, and we will be coming before you hopefully in August with some ideas and concepts, and there'll be a public meeting held for the community, which I encourage you to attend, on August 15th, where the engineers will be going into detail about the differing scenarios and concept plans developed that will ultimately appear before you in early September. But I think it would be a good opportunity for you to weigh in, particularly if you have any thoughts or concerns. And that's going to be in the evening of August 15th at the Hunt Memorial Building. Another item I wanted to bring to your attention is the Downtown Improvement Committee has recommended, and recommended based on my recommendation to them, that they look at increasing parking permit fees for surface and garage parking lots. We haven't looked at those fees since 2002, I think, off the top of my head. We just want to stay competitive with the market and make sure that we are being fair, and so I think it's time to gradually increase those parking fees over a period of time, and so some legislation will be coming before you on that, where we'll be looking to update those fees. So those are just two very quick infrastructure-related items I wanted to make sure I made you aware of, and I'd be happy to take any questions if you had on them, but nonetheless, just wanted to tease those for you.
Okay, very good. All right, moving on to the next thing is, we're now at the next part of public comment. Commissioner Pappas, as you return, I'm glad. If you wish, you'd be welcome to come forward.
So I did try to scooch in at the beginning of the meeting. I had my 11-year-old by herself. I wasn't sure if my husband was back or not yet. We leave her alone for an hour or so that's why I did leave. I've lived where I've lived for probably, and I know it's hard to listen to the public sometimes, but I've lived where I've lived for 25 years. And when my neighbors moved in, my husband and I didn't have any kids. And their youngest was not born yet. Their oldest was in first grade, and their middle daughter, they had 3 girls, was a toddler. And it's amazing that time goes by like this. And before you knew it, they were teenagers. So they had cars. So it was really nice seeing them grow up. And they're a really nice family. And as your kids grow up, you say, you know what? I really disagree with these teenagers having cars. I grew up one of 9. We had one car. It was my father's car that was a company car. So the girls start growing up. There are more cars. They left their cars out on the street for, I want to say, for 10 years. Never once got a ticket when the police department was in charge. So I think they probably figured there's a very wide road. We don't want to hassle. This is a really nice family who also realized that when you have teenagers, you want them to have a safe place to hang out, that's supervised. And there were often kids parked in front of my house. Not often, but I don't mean to say they had wild parties or anything like that. My lifestyle didn't change because kids parked their cars in front of my house. And even if they were going to have the after prom party, no problem. And you know what? If someone parked behind my driveway in the morning, I just gave a rap on the door. It was not a big deal at all. And now we started our family older. I've got my oldest is 20. He's in Chile now. He just left yesterday for his semester away. And my youngest is 11. So I got a 20-year-old, I got a 16-year-old, I have an 11-year-old. So I've got a bit where I'm going to have a few cars. And one of the first times we left the car out, we got a $25 ticket. I mean, even if it was $10, it would not have been that big of a deal. Um, I don't think it hurt anyone by having a car parked in front of my house. Um, that being said, it's not going to change. Nobody's going to skip a meal in my family. Clearly, I could skip a meal or two. No one in my family is going to skip a meal if we pay a $25 ticket. But there are folks that like $25 makes a difference, and we kind of do watch our dollars. And when I was talking to my alderman, I had mentioned I don't begrudge any of the folks that have parking permits. I don't begrudge that at all. And people may bring up my property on a GIS map and say, well, it's a plenty long driveway. Well, you know what? In the summer, I do have a dog gate up, and it's hard to get through. So I said I can essentially park 3 cars. My husband works long hours, and kids come in later, adults leave earlier in the morning, and it's a hassle. And when we're talking about economic development, we're really talking about wanting to keep the young people here. New Hampshire has one of the highest rates of loans, college loans. So yeah, kids, we want you to come back, but guess what? We're gonna charge you through the nose for tuition. You're gonna take the highest loans out, and guess what? When you come home to visit your folks, you're gonna get a $25 ticket if you park overnight. So I will tell you, I do understand. When I was talking with my alderman, she's in an interesting ward because when I get the $25 ticket, I said, who did I hurt by parking in front of my house? And then she's kind of dealing with the folks on French Hill, and it's too bad Alderman Lopez isn't here. But I know, like, for example, on the Tree Streets and French Hill, no matter, even if you have a driveway, even if you have plenty of parking, you're still able to buy a parking permit. And if you feel like, you know what, the Pappas family, you really don't need a parking permit, so we're going to charge you more, I would be willing to do that. But I think that others, I don't lose any, just like my life didn't change because my neighbors' kids may have parked their cars in front of my house overnight. My life doesn't change because someone from another part of the city gets a certain privilege. But I would really like that privilege for myself. And I get that it's a privilege and not a right. And I just want to clarify. It's been great having Alderman Jetty has been a great liaison to our board. And I guess what I want to make clear is that Public Works can figure out anything. We figured out how to make stuff work on the Tree Streets. So I'm just so in this, I'm just speaking as a citizen on my own, just kind of being an old crab. But so as I said, we figured it out in other areas. And you know what? If you park too close to the garbage cans, they're not gonna pick up your garbage. But we don't start till 5:45 anyway. But I do think that if we want kids to stay in the city, and if we want to bring people back, I do think that we ought to kind of be fair about the parking. And if you had told me when I was 16 years old that I would have, kids that had cars, I would say, no, I would just never allow that. That's ridiculous. But I'm kind of in that position. On a totally separate note, I actually feel really badly that I didn't come in here earlier on the leaf blowing issue. So I've been on, I can't believe it's been almost 10 years that I've been on Public Works. And since I've been on for a bit, people do call me. And I'm in the grocery store, people call me with complaints and concerns. And I've seen a lot of good in people in that on that, but I've also seen neighbors, as I said, my neighbors and I, we get along great. It's terrific. But there are some really nasty people out there that purposely try to aggravate others. And I'll give an example. This past fall, I got a call from someone who said, well, this person blew a pile of leaves on their lawn, and they covered it somewhat with tarps, but they take a leaf blower occasionally and just blow it out in the street, and it ends up right in my yard. And I thought, that's ridiculous. So I drove by several times, and I did it my son was learning to drive, so it was, it was a way for me to be able to, keep my eye on. And I was able to see this person was indeed doing that. And one of the concerns that someone gave at the committee, that the police are going to waste their time, I can tell you the police know what to do with their time, just like the fire department. They usually get stuck in the middle of these unfortunate messes. And just as I was going about my third drive-by to try to get a picture, because I'm a terrible photographer also, there were 2 police cruisers there because 2 separate neighbors had called the police. So whether or not this thing was on the books, the police, whether you put it on the books or not, they're going to get hung holding the bag on stuff like this because people can be extremely inconsiderate, which is unfortunate. We did put some exceptions in. I know occasionally people will hire someone, they'll blow, apparently this is a thing in some of the Massachusetts towns, that you blow your leaves out in the road and they come by with a vacuum and suck them up. So, so we put in an exception for that. And I can tell you, it takes weeks someone's got to be a serial offender before they're going to get tagged for something like this. And if people have complained that their neighbors didn't rake their leaves, and I said, there's nothing I can do about that. It's their property. They can do whatever they want with it or not want with it. But if they care about enough their lawn to blow the stuff out in the street for the neighbors to pick up, well, that's just, I don't care about you. And it really, I've seen probably more good than bad, but it is unfortunate. It does make me more thankful for my neighbors when I've seen some of the nasty neighborhood issues out there. But I can tell you that I feel very strongly that this item should be passed. And I understand concerns about the police, but they will get stuck in the middle of it. At the end of the day, it's really the people that we're supposed to be representing. And this stuff is important to them. And sometimes just when you do a drive-by, when you get a concern like this, maybe a police officer doesn't get called to the door. Sometimes just listening to folks, I think, is a really important part this board plays. So anyway, I'm sorry to have left in a huff. I was quite nervous about my daughter because it had been a little bit, I thought it was going to be a quicker meeting than it was. I didn't realize we were going to have the issue at the beginning. And my husband was home, by the way, so it wasn't more than an hour, so don't call DCYS on me. So anyway, I thank you all for your time, and thank you, Alderman Jettie. And so thank you. Have a great night.
I'm glad you were able to return, so that's good. Any other public comments still open? Anybody else have any public comment to the board? Seeing none. Remarks from Alderman. Alderman Gedge.
Yes, without mentioning any names or anyone in this room, June, somebody came in and made false statements to the board that was in session. And I talked to you earlier tonight about that, and you suggested this may not be the time to talk about it, and you suggested that we talk to President McCarthy first. Now, on another note, my wife Lee broke a hip, fell off and broke a hip. Of course, we tried to keep that a secret, which didn't become a secret. And then her sense of humor came back, so it's all over the internet, of course. I'm blamed for something, even though I wasn't home. But and today the individual came in to give her physical therapy and said, "I have never seen a person like you. Well, I'm not coming back here." So Lee is at the point where she's crazy, meaning she wants to do this and she can't. But she's getting well, she's happy, everything's fine. She'll be jumping around, and I did, and she wanted me to thank everybody who, one way or another, said something. But she's doing well, and again, thank you for those who did mention it. We do appreciate it.
Thank you. And also my best too. Breaking your hip is very serious, and it's a process, and I wish her a very speedy recovery, and, Be a good husband, take good care of the missus.
Oh, God, wait a minute, it's impossible.
Very good. Any other additional comments from members of the board? Seeing none, I don't see a need to go into non-public session. Alderman Kidge, do you have a motion?
Yes, let's go home, adjourn.
Okay, a motion to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, bingo. The Infrastructure Committee is terminated at 8:55. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Schmidt.
Oh, yeah, the far right.